When Victoria whispered, "Together we can be free," into Tempest's ear, the silence that fell over the arena was so profound it seemed to swallow even the wind that swept across the plains of Harmony Creek. The untamed stallion, which had thrown dozens of experienced riders, remained motionless on his knees, breathing in perfect harmony with the woman everyone knew only as the junkyard scavenger. Richard Vance, the magnate who had offered $500,000 to anyone who could tame his horse, watched in stunned silence as his theory on power and domination crumbled before his eyes. In that moment, suspended in time, something far greater than a simple bet was being decided. But to understand how a nameless woman, without money or recognition, managed to achieve the impossible, we must go back to the beginning of this story. 3 weeks earlier, as the January sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of the small inland town, Richard Vance had arrived with his entourage in a procession of imported cars that kicked up a cloud of red dust. He stepped out of his black Mercedes, wearing a suit that cost more than most residents earned in a year, adjusted his Swiss watch, and smiled with the arrogance of someone accustomed to buying whatever he desired. The news spread through the town like wildfire. An agribusiness magnate, owner of ranches in 3 states, had brought his most valuable stallion for a public challenge, $500,000 to whoever could tame him. It was a sum that made eyes gleam and tongues wag. On street corners, in bars, at the Central Square's market, that's all anyone talked about. $500,000, they repeated to each other, as if the words were magic. The horse arrived in a custom-built trailer equipped with air conditioning and padded flooring. Tempest was a magnificent creature, 3 years old, with a dark brown coat that shined like polished bronze, a rebellious mane that danced in the wind, and eyes that seemed to hold all the wildness in the world. He had been bred to be untamable, fed the most expensive imported feed, trained by specialists who received express orders to keep his rebellious nature intact. For Richard, the animal represented power in its purest form, a force that doesn't bend, doesn't sell out, doesn't corrupt. "Observe," Richard declared to the small crowd gathered around the trailer. "This horse is proof that there are things money can't buy. For 3 years I've been trying to tame him. I've hired the best riders in the country. None have managed to stay on his back for more than 10 seconds. He paused dramatically, savoring the attention. "But I believe that among you there might be someone who can prove me wrong. Someone who can do what I, with all my money and resources, couldn't." The crowd murmured, impressed. Some men approached to observe the animal more closely, assessing their chances. Tempest eyed them with suspicion, nostrils flared, muscles tense beneath his glossy coat. When someone extended a hand towards him, he recoiled and snorted, making it clear that he would not accept approaches. The bet wasn't just about money. For Richard, it was a philosophical question. He believed that in the modern world, where everything had a price, where relationships were business and feelings were commodities, something pure and incorruptible still existed: the wild instinct. Tempest was his living proof that not everything could be tamed by civilization. And if someone could tame him, it would prove that even the most primitive power could be broken by human determination. While Richard displayed his arrogance in the Central Square, 10 miles away, in the forgotten outskirts of Harmony Creek, Victoria woke with the first rays of sun filtering through the plastic tarp that served as the roof of her small shack. At 30, her face bore the marks of a hard life, but her dark eyes still held a sweetness that contrasted with the harshness of her daily life. Her dark hair, always tied in a simple braid, was prematurely gray, a result of constant worries and working under the scorching sun. Victoria lived in what the townspeople called Junkyard Hollow, a cluster of shacks built from salvaged materials where families survived by collecting recyclables. Her home was a little better than most: exposed brick walls, a burnished cement floor, and 3 small but clean rooms. She had built it all with her own hands, brick by brick, with the money she earned collecting glass, paper, and metal. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, she walked to the municipal junkyard. She carried 2 large burlap sacks and a wooden stick to sift through the trash. She knew the truck schedules, knew which neighborhoods yielded the best materials, had memorized the treasures she could find amidst what others considered disposable. It wasn't just a job for her, it was a mission to give new life to what was abandoned. But Victoria had a secret that few knew. In the back of her house, in a small backyard surrounded by bamboo, she kept an improvised sanctuary for injured animals. Hit dogs, sick cats, birds with broken wings, all found refuge there. She spent a good portion of her meager earnings buying medicine and food, caring for creatures that no one else wanted. Her neighbors called her crazy, but she didn't care. Every living being deserves a second chance, she used to say to Maria, her 12-year-old niece, who had lived with her since the girl's parents migrated to a larger city in search of work. It was Maria who brought the news about Richard Vance's challenge. The girl burst through the door, breathless, her eyes shining with excitement. "Aunt Viv, did you hear about the rich guy who came to town? He's offering $500,000 to anyone who can tame his horse." Victoria was preparing dinner, a simple potato and sausage stew, when she paused to listen to her niece. $500,000! It was a sum she could hardly comprehend. With that kind of money, she could renovate the house, give Maria a better life, maybe even expand her small animal sanctuary. But it was when Maria described the horse that something stirred within her. "They say he's really wild, Aunt. Nobody can get close. The rich guy said he tried to tame him for 3 years and couldn't. I think the horse must be very sad, huh?" Victoria was silent for a long moment, stirring the stew absent-mindedly. An untamable horse, an animal that resisted all efforts to break its will. She knew that feeling well, the feeling of holding firm when the whole world was trying to bend you. There was something in that story that resonated deeply in her soul. That night, after Maria fell asleep, Victoria went out to the backyard and sat in an old plastic chair, gazing at the stars. Around her, some of the animals she cared for rested. Rex, a stray dog who had arrived with a broken leg and was now her most faithful companion. Barichina, a cat who had been poisoned and whom she had saved with dedicated care. And Canario, a small yellow bird that had fallen from its nest as a chick and who, even as a grown bird, preferred to stay there. "What do you think?" she asked the animals, as she often did when she needed to make important decisions. "Do you think I could help this horse?" Rex lifted his head and looked at her with those trusting brown eyes. Brecina purred softly. Canario sang a gentle melody. To Victoria, these were sufficient answers. The next morning, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She put on her best clothes, a faded but clean pair of jeans and a simple white blouse, and walked to the center of town. The makeshift arena was already being set up in the central square. Wooden bleachers, metal fences, a small platform where Richard would observe the spectacle. Dozens of people were working on the preparations, and the buzz was constant. Victoria timidly approached one of the organizers. "Excuse me," she said softly, "I'd like to sign up for the challenge." The man looked her up and down, noticing her simple clothes and calloused hands. "Do you have experience with horses?" "I have experience with injured animals," she replied, and something in her voice made the man write her name on the list without asking any more questions. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with anticipation. Experienced riders arrived from neighboring towns, robust men who brought their own saddles, whips, and spurs. They spoke loudly about their achievements, about the horses they had tamed, about the techniques they would use to break Tempest's resistance. Victoria listened to them in silence, becoming increasingly convinced that they did not understand the true nature of the challenge. She returned several times to the square to observe Tempest. The horse was kept in a temporary corral, always agitated, always alert. When people approached, he would move to the farthest corner, ears back, eyes distrustful. But Victoria noticed something the others didn't. Behind the aggression, there was fear. Tempest wasn't just wild, he was scared. "You've been hurt too," she whispered during one of her visits, keeping a respectful distance. As if he had heard her words, the horse stopped pacing and looked directly at her. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Victoria felt an inexplicable connection. There was something there, a mutual understanding between two creatures who knew the pain of abandonment. If you are following this story and it is touching your heart, consider subscribing to our channel to receive more reports like this, stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit and the magic of improbable encounters that transform lives. The day of the challenge dawned with unrelenting heat. The sun beat down hard on the makeshift arena, and even before 8 in the morning, the bleachers were packed. People from all over the region had come to watch the spectacle. Street vendors offered water, soda, and pastries. Children ran between the chairs. The air vibrated with the expectation of witnessing something extraordinary. Richard Vance arrived punctually at 9 o'clock, wearing a red jacket that made him seem even more imposing. He climbed onto the platform and took a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the square. "Today, you will witness something unique. Some of you will leave here $500,000 richer. Others will discover that there are forces in nature that cannot be tamed by money or technique." Tempest was brought to the center of the arena, and a murmur ran through the crowd. The horse was magnificently terrifying. Tense muscles, dilated nostrils, moving with the dangerous grace of a cornered predator. His eyes scanned the crowd with suspicion, and when someone tried to approach, he would back away and snort menacingly. The first challengers were the most experienced. Joaquin Santos, a rodeo rider from Ribeirão Preto, approached confidently, carrying a professional saddle and silver spurs. He had tamed hundreds of horses in his career, and his technique was impeccable. But when he tried to approach Tempest, the horse exploded in fury. He kicked, reared, spun in circles until Joaquin was forced to return, sweating and breathless. "Next," shouted Richard, clearly pleased with the failure. One after another, the riders tried their luck. They used lassos, tried to corral the animal, offered carrots and sugar. Some managed to touch the horse briefly, but none came close to mounting him. With each failure, Richard Vance's smile grew wider. His theory was being proven. There were things money couldn't buy, and untamed nature was one of them. By the time it was Victoria's turn, it was midday, and the heat was stifling. Many spectators had left, disillusioned by the apparent impossibility of the task. She entered the arena silently, carrying only an old cotton rag she used to wipe the sweat during her days working at the junkyard. She had no saddle, no whip, no spurs. Some of the failed riders lacked openly. "It's the junkyard scavenger," someone commented from the stands. "She must be desperate for the money." "Poor thing," said another, "she's going to get hurt." Richard frowned. He hadn't expected someone like Victoria to sign up for the challenge. Her presence seemed to diminish the grandeur of the event. "Are you sure you want to try?" he asked into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. Victoria didn't answer. She walked slowly to the center of the arena where Tempest awaited. The horse was agitated after all the failed attempts to tame him. Dried foam marked his muzzle, and he breathed heavily. When he saw Victoria approaching, he assumed his usual defensive posture, muscles tense, ears back, ready to strike. But then something extraordinary happened. Instead of trying to approach immediately, Victoria stopped at a safe distance and simply stood there, still looking at the animal. She made no sudden movements, didn't reach out, didn't speak. She just remained motionless, breathing calmly, allowing Tempest to get used to her presence. Minutes passed. The crowd grew impatient. "Do something," someone yelled. But Victoria didn't move. She knew that haste was the enemy of trust. In her work with injured animals, she had learned that sometimes the best action is inaction, to let the animal realize that you don't pose a threat. Gradually, Tempest began to relax. His ears moved forward, his breathing became more regular. He remained alert, but the extreme hostility was diminishing. It was as if he was realizing that this person was different from the others. It was then that Victoria began to speak. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but in the silent arena, everyone could hear her. "I know you're afraid," she said, still not moving. "I've been afraid too. Afraid of not being able to care for my niece. Afraid of not having enough food. Afraid that nobody would see me as a person. But fear doesn't define who we are." Tempest tilted his head slightly, as if listening. It was an almost imperceptible gesture, but Victoria noticed it. "You're not vicious," she continued. "You're strong. There's a difference. Viciousness comes from fear, but strength comes from the heart. And I can see the strength in your heart." Slowly, very slowly, she took a step forward. Tempest tensed, but didn't retreat. She took another step, and another. The crowd held its breath. Even Richard had leaned forward, intrigued by this completely different approach. "My name is Victoria," she said, when she was a few feet from the horse. "Not because I always win, but because I always keep trying. And you, Tempest, you don't need to be a tempest to be powerful. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in calm." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, not trying to touch the horse, just offering her presence. Tempest lowered his head and, cautiously, sniffed her hand. His warm, wet muzzle touched Victoria's calloused skin, and she felt a shiver run through her entire body. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered. What happened next was like a dance. Victoria moved around the horse with the same gentleness with which she cared for her injured animals. She touched his neck, stroked his mane, whispered words of comfort in his ear. Tempest remained motionless, as if hypnotized by this unexpected kindness. When she finally placed the old rag on the horse's back, improvising a symbolic saddle, he didn't even flinch. And when she prepared to mount, gently placing her hand on his back, Tempest lowered himself slightly, making it easier for her to climb on. The arena was in absolute silence. Hundreds of people watched, incredulous, as Victoria mounted the horse that had thrown every other challenger. She sat carefully, keeping her hands relaxed, her knees loose, her body in harmony with the animal's movements. "Now," she whispered in his ear, "show me how you like to run when no one is trying to force you." And Tempest ran, not with the destructive fury he had shown with the other riders, but with the pure joy of an animal that finally felt free to be himself. They galloped around the arena, horse and rider in perfect harmony, as if they had been born for that moment. When they stopped in the center of the arena, the silence was broken by an explosion of applause. People cried, shouted, embraced each other. Children pointed in wonder. Even some of the defeated riders applauded, recognizing that they had witnessed something much bigger than a simple demonstration of equestrian skill. Richard Vance slowly descended from the platform, his face a mixture of astonishment and confusion. His entire philosophy of power and domination had crumbled before his eyes. He approached Victoria, who had dismounted and was now stroking Tempest's neck. "How?" was all he could say. Victoria looked at him with her gentle eyes. "I didn't tame him," she said. "I just listened to him. There's a difference between taming and understanding. You all wanted to break his will, but I wanted to know his heart. But he's wild, untamable." "He's free," Victoria corrected, "and nobody can tame freedom. We can only respect it and, if we're lucky, be invited to participate in it." Richard remained silent for a long moment, processing those words. In his businessman's mind, In the mind of a man used to controlling everything around him, it made no sense. But faced with the evidence before his own eyes, he couldn't deny he was wrong. "The money is yours," he said finally, pulling a check from his inside jacket pocket. "You win." Victoria took the check with trembling hands. $500,000. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. But as she looked at Tempest, who now grazed calmly a few yards away, she knew exactly what to do with it. "I accept the prize," she said, "but on one condition. Tempest comes with me. He deserves to live in freedom, not as anyone's trophy." Richard was about to protest. After all, the horse was worth far more than the $500,000. But something in Victoria's expression made him change his mind. Perhaps it was the dignity with which she spoke, or perhaps it was the fact that for the first time in his life, he had encountered someone who couldn't be bought. "All right," he agreed. "Tempest is yours." In the months that followed, Victoria's life changed completely, but not in the way many expected. She didn't move into a mansion, buy luxury cars, or abandon her simple life. Instead, she used the money to build something extraordinary, a sanctuary for abandoned animals on the land next to her old house. The Tempest Sanctuary, as it became known, became a refuge for hundreds of injured, abandoned, or mistreated animals. Victoria hired veterinarians, built adequate facilities, and created responsible adoption programs. But more than that, she trained a team of volunteers in her philosophy of care. Understanding instead of domination, patience instead of force, love instead of control. Tempest became the symbol of the sanctuary. Free to roam the pastures, he sometimes allowed children to climb on his back, but only those who approached with gentleness and respect. He had become not just a tamed horse, but a teacher of trust and compassion. Victoria and Tempest's story spread far beyond Harmony Creek. Journalists came from major cities to tell their story. Television programs invited her for interviews. Universities called her to lecture on alternative animal training methods. But she always returned home, to her sanctuary, to the animals who depended on her. Maria, her niece, grew up at the sanctuary and became a veterinarian, specializing in animal-assisted therapy. She often said that her aunt had taught her the most important lesson in life. It's not strength that makes us powerful, it's the capacity to love. Richard Vance was also transformed by that experience. He began to question his business methods, his relationship with power, and his understanding of what truly mattered in life. Not overnight, profound changes take time, but gradually, he became one of the sanctuary's biggest supporters, donating not only money, but also his time and influence to protect animals at risk. Years later, when asked about the secret to taming the untamable horse, Victoria would always smile and say, "I didn't tame anyone. I just learned that true strength isn't in making others bend to our will, but in bending to the wisdom of the heart." Tempest taught me that freedom and love can coexist, that trust isn't weakness, and that sometimes the greatest victory is not winning, but understanding. The sanctuary continues to operate to this day, a living monument to the idea that kindness can be more powerful than force, that patience can conquer what haste cannot, and that all beings, human or animal, deserve to be seen, heard, and loved for who they truly are, not for what they might become under pressure. And Tempest? He lives his days running free through the sanctuary's fields, his mane dancing in the wind, his eyes shining not with distrust anymore, but with the serenity of one who has finally found a home where he can be truly free. Sometimes, as the sun sets and paints the sky gold, he stops near the fence and looks down the road, as if he were guarding the place, protecting all the other animals who still arrive there broken, and who, like him, Discover that sometimes all we need to heal is to find someone who sees us not as a problem to be solved, but as a heart to be understood. This is the story of how a whisper tamed the wind, how kindness conquered force, and how two wounded souls, a woman and a horse, found each other and discovered that true freedom is not the absence of bonds, but the presence of love that allows us to be who we truly are.